What would you do if you came home and saw someone you buried 6 months ago standing in your kitchen? Before I tell you what happened that morning after my night shift, hit that subscribe button because this story will shake everything you believe about life, death, and the unexplainable bonds between souls. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single word of this. I came back to house after the night shift and there was my mother-in-law making lunch and I dropped everything in my hands because she had been dead for 6 months and I had carried her coffin with my own trembling shoulders and watched them lower her into the frozen ground that December morning when the world felt like it was ending and my wife Sarah had collapsed into my arms, unable to breathe, unable to process that her mother was gone forever, taken by the sudden heart attack that came without warning in the middle of the night while she slept peacefully in the guest room of our small 2-bedroom house where she had been staying to help us with the new baby. And now here she was standing at my kitchen counter in the same floral apron she always wore, humming that old hymn she loved while chopping vegetables with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times before, and the sunlight streaming through the window caught her silver hair in a way that made her look almost ethereal, almost angelic, and I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe as I stood there in the doorway with my work boots still on and my lunch bag hanging from fingers that had gone completely numb. And she turned around then with that warm smile that had always made me feel welcome in a family that was mine by blood but had become mine through love and commitment, and she said, "Thomas darling, you look exhausted, sit down and let me make you something to eat before you rest," and her voice was exactly the same, soft and nurturing with that slight Southern accent she never quite lost even after 40 years up north, and I felt my knees start to buckle, felt the world tilting sideways because this couldn't be happening, this couldn't be real, and yet there she stood as solid and present as the table between us, and I managed to whisper, "Margaret, is that really you?" And she laughed that gentle laugh that always reminded me of wind chimes and said, "Of course it's me, honey, who else would it be?" And I stumbled backward into the hallway wall, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs, and I heard myself saying, "But you died, we buried you, Sarah and I, we stood at your grave, we watched them." And I couldn't finish the sentence because my throat closed up and tears started streaming down my face hot and fast, and Margaret's expression changed, then shifted into something deeper, something filled with an emotion I couldn't quite name, and she put down the knife very carefully and wiped her hands on the apron and walked toward me with her arms outstretched. And when she touched my face with her warm soft hand I nearly collapsed because it was real, she was real. This wasn't a dream or a hallucination brought on by exhaustion from too many double shifts at the hospital where I worked as a nurse. And she said, "Oh Thomas, my dear sweet boy, I know this must be frightening, I know this doesn't make any sense, but I need you to listen very carefully because I don't have much time," and something in the way she said those last words sent ice water through my veins, and I grabbed her hand, the one touching my face, and I held it tight as if I could keep her here through sheer force of will, and I said, "What do you mean you don't have much time? What's happening? Why are you here?" And she led me to the kitchen table, the same table where we had shared so many meals, so many conversations about life and love and the complicated, beautiful mess of being human, and she sat me down and she took both my hands in hers and she said, "I came back because Sarah needs me, because you both need me, because something is about to happen and you have to be ready." And I felt my stomach drop, felt fear creep up my spine like cold fingers, and I said, "What do you mean, what's going to happen? Is Sarah okay? Is the baby okay?" And Margaret squeezed my hands tighter and said, "Sarah is in danger, Thomas, not physical danger, but something darker, something that's been growing inside her since I passed, and you haven't seen it because you've been working so hard trying to keep everything together, trying to be strong for everyone, but she's drowning and she's about to do something that can be undone." And I jerked back in my chair, horror washing over me because I knew what she meant. I had seen the signs, the way Sarah had grown distant and quiet, the way she stared at nothing for hours, the way she barely ate, barely slept, barely held our daughter anymore, and I had told myself it was just grief, just the normal process of mourning, but deep down I had known it was more than that. I had felt it in the cold space that had grown between us, in the way she flinched when I touched her, in the desperate empty look in her eyes that scared me more than anything I had ever seen. And I said, "Where is she now? Where's the baby?" And Margaret said, "They're at the park, the one 3 blocks away where I used to take Sarah when she was little, and she's there right now sitting on that bench by the duck pond, and she has a bottle of pills in her pocket, enough to make everything stop, enough to end the pain, and she's watching Emma play on the swings, and she's thinking about how peaceful it would be to just let go, to just drift away, and she thinks Emma would be better off without her, that you'd be better off without her." And I was on my feet before she finished the sentence, was running for the door, grabbing my keys with hands that shook so badly I could barely hold them, and Margaret called after me, but I was already out the door sprinting. down the front steps and into my car, and I drove like a madman through the quiet suburban streets where people were mowing lawns and walking dogs, completely unaware that my entire world was about to shatter, and I prayed harder than I had ever prayed. In my life, prayed to a God I wasn't even sure I believed in anymore after watching Margaret die, after seeing so much death and suffering in my years as a nurse, but I prayed anyway because what else could I do? And when I screeched into the parking lot of the park, I saw her. Immediately saw Sarah sitting on that exact bench, exactly as Margaret had described, and our daughter Emma was on the swings, her blonde curls bouncing as she pumped her little legs back and forth, laughing with pure innocent joy, and Sarah was watching her, but there was something in her posture, something in the slump of her shoulders that made my heart crack wide open. And I ran across the grass, not caring that people were staring, and when I reached her I dropped to my knees in front of that bench. And I took her cold hands in mine and I said, "Sarah, look at me, please look at me," and she did, slowly, like it hurt to move, and her eyes were empty, Thomas, her eyes were like looking into an abyss, and she said, "I can't do this anymore, I can't, I am so tired," and I felt tears streaming down my face again. And I said, "I know, baby, I know you're tired, I know it's been so hard, but please don't leave me, don't leave Emma, we need you so much," and she shook her head and said, "You'd be better off, I'm just dragging you down, I can't be the mother Emma deserves, I can be the wife you deserve, everything is so dark, Thomas, everything hurts all the time, and I can feel your mother watching over you right now, I can feel her here with us," and Sarah's eyes widened and she looked around wildly and said, "What are you talking about, what do you mean?" And I realized I hadn't told her about seeing Margaret, about the impossible miracle that had happened in our kitchen just 20 minutes ago, and I said, "Your mother came back, Sarah, she was in our house making lunch just like she used to, and she told me you were here, and she told me you were hurting, and she told me I had to save you," and Sarah started sobbing, then huge racking sobs that shook her whole body, and she said, "That's not possible, Thomas, she's gone, I watched her die. I saw them close the casket, I felt them throw dirt on her grave," and I said, I know it doesn't make sense, but it happened, it was real. And she sent me here because she loves you, because she couldn't bear to watch you suffer, because even death couldn't keep her from protecting you," and Sarah was hyperventilating now, gasping for air between sobs. And I held her tight, held her like I should have been holding her for months while she fell apart. And I said, "We're going to get through this together, we're going to see a doctor, we're going to get you help, real help. And I'm going to be here every single step, I'm going to cut back my shifts, I'm going to do whatever it takes, because I can't lose you, Sarah, I can let our daughter grow up without her mother. And you are a good mother, you're an amazing mother. This isn't you, this is the depression, this is the grief, this is a chemical imbalance in your brain that's lying to you and telling you things that aren't true." And slowly, I felt her start to breathe more normally, felt her grip on my shirt loosen just slightly, and she whispered, "Do you really think she was there? Do you think my mom really came back?" And I said, "I don't know how, but yes, she was there, she was as real as you are right now, and she loves you so much, and she wants you to fight." And Sarah looked over at Emma, who was still swinging, still laughing, still completely innocent to the crisis unfolding 20 feet away, and Sarah said, "I don't want to leave her, I don't want to die, I just want the pain to stop." And I said, "Then let me help you, let us help you," and she reached into her pocket with a shaking hand and pulled out a prescription bottle, and she stared at it for a long moment, and then she handed it to me and said, okay, I'll try." And I took that bottle and I held it so tight the plastic cracked, and I said, "We're going to go home now, and we're going to call the crisis line, and we're going to figure this out one moment at a time." And she nodded, and we stood up together and we walked over to Emma, and we scooped her up, and she giggled and said, "Mama, why are you crying?" And Sarah smiled through her tears and said, "Because I love you so much, sweetheart, more than anything in the whole world." And we drove home slowly, carefully, and when we walked through the front door I expected to see Margaret still there, still standing in that kitchen, but the room was empty, the vegetables were still on the cutting board, half chopped, and the apron was draped over the chair, but she was gone, and I felt a strange mixture of gratitude and grief, because I understood then that she had used whatever grace, whatever cosmic exception had allowed her to come back for that one purpose, for that one moment, to save her daughter from a darkness that would have consumed everything. And we called the hospital, and we got Sarah admitted to the psychiatric unit, where she stayed for 2 weeks and started on medication and therapy, and slowly she started to come back to us, started to smile again, started to hold Emma again, started to be present in her own life. And there were hard days, so many hard days, where the medication made her sick, or the therapy brought up painful memories, or the depression convinced her nothing would ever get better, but she kept fighting, and I kept fighting alongside her. And Emma kept being the bright light that pulled us both forward. And one evening, about 3 months after that day in the park, when Sarah was home and doing so much better, we were sitting on the back porch watching the sunset, and Sarah said, "Do you still think about that day? Do you still think about my mom appearing?" And I said, "Every single day." And she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I went to her grave yesterday by myself, and I stood there and I told her everything that been happening, and I thanked her for saving me, and I felt this warmth, this presence, like she was right there listening, and I don't know if it was real or if it was just my imagination, but it felt real, and that's what matters. And I took her hand and I said it was real, Sarah. Somehow, someway it was real, and she squeezed my fingers and said, sometimes I wonder if she's still watching, if she's still here in some way, and I said, I think she is. I think love like that doesn't just end. I think it transcends everything, even death. And we sat there in comfortable silence while the sky turned orange and pink and purple, and I thought about all the things I didn't understand about the universe, about consciousness, about the thin veil between this world and whatever comes next. And I realized I didn't need to understand it. I just needed to be grateful for the miracle that had saved my wife's life. And as the stars started to appear one by one in the darkening sky, I sent up a silent thank you to Margaret wherever she was, and I felt in my bones that she heard me. And 6 months later, Sarah was thriving, was back to work part-time as a teacher, was laughing again, really laughing, and playing with Emma, and talking about plans for the future. And one morning, I woke up early before everyone else, and I went downstairs to make coffee, and there on the kitchen counter, folded neatly, was the floral apron, the one Margaret had been wearing that impossible day. And I knew I had put it away in the back of the closet months ago. I knew Sarah hadn't taken it out, and I picked it up and I held it to my face, and it smelled like her perfume, that lavender scent she always wore. And I understood it was a message, a reminder that she was still there, still watching, still protecting us, and I hung it back on its hook by the stove where it had always hung when she was alive. And from that day forward, whenever things got hard, whenever Sarah had a bad day, or I felt overwhelmed, or Emma asked why Grandma wasn't here anymore, I would look at that apron and I would remember that love is stronger than death, that sometimes the universe bends its own rules for those who need it most, and that the people we love never truly leave us. They live on in our hearts, in our memories, in the small miracles that appear when we need them most. And years later, when Emma was old enough to understand, I told her the whole story about the morning I came home from my night shift and found her grandmother in our kitchen, and about how she saved her mother's life from beyond the grave. And Emma listened with wide eyes, and when I finished she said, so Grandma was an angel? And I thought about that for a moment, about all the different ways we try to explain the unexplainable, and I said, yes, sweetheart, she was an angel. She is an angel, and she's watching over all of us. And Emma smiled and said, I thought so. Sometimes I feel her when I'm scared, like someone's hugging me, and I can't see them. And I felt tears prick my eyes, and I said, that's her baby, that's definitely her. And now whenever I come home from my night shifts at the hospital, tired and worn down by the suffering I witnessed, I always pause in the doorway of our kitchen, and I remember that morning, the most terrifying and miraculous morning of my life, and I think about how close we came to losing everything, and how grace intervened in the form of a mother's love that refused to be bound by the limitations of mortality. And I know without a doubt that we are never alone, that the people we love are never truly gone, and that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe gives us exactly what we need, exactly when we need it, even if we can explain it, even if it defies everything we think we know about how the world works. And that apron still hangs by the stove, and sometimes on quiet mornings when sunlight streams through the window in just the right way, I catch the scent of lavender, and I smile and I whisper, thank you, Margaret, thank you for coming back, thank you for saving her, thank you for loving us enough to break through the barrier between worlds. And she doesn't answer, not in words, but I feel it, the warm presence, the gentle touch of grace, the eternal bond of family that not even death can sever. And I carry that with me every single day, a reminder that love is the only thing that truly matters, and the only thing that lasts forever.